Yes. Okay. So, this talk is about Perl and RPGs, specifically Pathfinder in this iteration, but the code is designed to be portable to different systems, different game systems, and the idea is to make it flexible enough to support anything that you may come up with. This includes things like D&D Basic or storyteller systems, just to be clear. So, right. I am apeiron, or Chris Nairn, if you insist. I work for Tamaru. I work for Shadowcat. You find me on IRC as apeiron. Yes. So you can email me at the pauseid@cpan.org. So, I guess we should start, with what this talk is about. The general idea is, having fun with RPGs with Perl. They're both meant to be fun. Well, RPGs are meant to be fun. Perl happens to be fun. So we can put the two together. But the idea here is to consider how we can make RPGs more fun by applying Perl. So a quick overview of what this the problem that I was trying to solve. I like to do tabletop RPGs a lot. I'm actually missing an organized play session to be here with you. So I'm going to be behind in my advancement for my wizard to be here. So, and then I have a game that I'm not running this Saturday as well. So I play games at least twice a week. The thing that I noticed is taking a lot of time is adjudicating combats in various different systems. Things like Pathfinder, 4th edition, and other more rules-heavy game systems tend to slow down in combats and making sure everyone has a turn. And I myself am very guilty of getting in the habit of continually skipping someone, unintentionally, of course. But if I notice that I unintentionally skip someone repeatedly, then they bug me and I feel bad because I don't want to skip them. So I want to be sure that the computer tells me, this person is going now. Don't skip them, you idiot. So I want to be able to make sure the computer reminds me who goes when, that kind of thing. And I want to be interacting with my players, not with the rules. Because that's why I'm doing a tabletop game, right? Instead of something on a computer. I want to be interacting with the people, not the computer. So I figured, Perl is really, really good at automating things. So, and I began to think about what defines a combat in an RPG system. And they're principally comprised of they're very deterministic states. If this happens, then this happens. If these things are true, then you go to this state. And you can revert and go back and forth, that kind of thing. But generally the idea is that you look at the data that you have, then you make a decision of what happens next based on that data. And it's very deterministic, very state-oriented. So don't we have something to deal with that kind of thing? I seem to recall from reading about computer sciencey things that we have something to handle states and transitioning between them. So one of the things that I'm going to be talking about today is finite state automata. I hope at least some people in the audience are familiar with an FSA or an NFA or a DFA or any of those other FA acronyms. Generally, the idea is that an FSA is a set of rules that define a state and how to transition from one state to another. So I feel that this, really models an RPG combat very well. It's a system that moves, from one state to another based on some data, which is what we said above about an RPG combat. If you have a player who is unconscious, they're not going to be acting in the combat except maybe to remove that status from themselves, or attempt to, anyway. So we have a very deterministic, very calculatable way of figuring out where you're going to be from your available data. You can think of it in terms of thermodynamics if that makes it easier for you. except there is free lunch in this. So, well, in a matter of speaking, there is. But anyway, it tells you, you know, where you've been, what you have, and where to go. And something that you want to keep in mind about an FSA as opposed to a DFA is that you have multiple possible destination transitions in an FSA as opposed to a DFA, which, as I understand it, is only one transition from one state to another. So you want to test all the transitions that you can make, order them by the priority that you want to do, the thing that is most likely to happen, that kind of thing. So, what do we have here when we're putting Perl together with an RPG of some sort? It's basically a way of, you know, keeping track of who goes when. And as I said, the examples that I'm going to be going through, the code that I'm going to be looking at, is based very, very loosely on Pathfinder. And when I talked to Rick about this, he said, does this handle D&D Basic? Because one of the core assumptions in Pathfinder is that creatures from the NPC side and creatures from the PC side, they interleave their turns. But in D&D Basic, if I understand correctly, it's one side has an initiative and the other side has an initiative. And they all go at once, if I understand correctly. Something like that. I'm sure Rick will correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you. So, you know, that's what we have here. But I think it's important to go over what this isn't so that people are not unduly or unnecessarily disappointed. This is a very, very simple system as I have it right now. It doesn't track, you know, any status. Well, it doesn't track, you know, creature health. It doesn't record what someone does. It's not a virtual tabletop. I've thought of building this into a virtual tabletop, but this itself is so far from that that you'd be very sorely disappointed if you tried to make it into one. It does not replace the game master or the storyteller or the referee or whatever you want to call them. It is not complete right now. It is still in development. Going to be testing it at game night tomorrow night. The code was designed, you know, to be as minimal and Unix-oriented as possible, really. And what I mean by that is that when you to take an analogy from linguistics, when you describe something, you limit it, right? So when you add scaffolding on a computer to something, you're limited by what that scaffolding can do. So if you have less scaffolding, then there's fewer restrictions imposed on what you're able to do. Therefore, this code is very, very minimal, such that you are not constrained by what the program can do, and you have the freedom to do whatever you want. Okay, so what isn't it? Now that I've, you know, told you what it isn't, what is it? It tracks who goes when. If you have a game that implies that it imposes some simple statuses like unconscious or has a disease or whatever, you can do that if you want to. It's not required. If a status precludes someone from acting, you know, you can skip them, say they're unconscious or worse. That's it, really. Anything more is a bug. It is defined more by what it isn't than by what it is. Now, of course, what one should always ask when writing new software is there something that does this already? I looked around a lot. You know, I did some Google searches, researched on various game forums, that kind of thing. And all the tools that I found they're typically very big, very bulky. They do a lot of things. And I don't want a lot of things. And worse, as a Unix fan, almost all the tools that I found are Windows-based. And worse, as a Unix fan, they all required a GUI of some kind. I live in a terminal. I have 50-some pages in tmux right now, and I'm not exaggerating. So I wanted something I can start up in a terminal and do Unixy things with. So there definitely was not a tool that I found that did this. So here we are. Right, so some of you may be wondering, you just said to keep it minimal, apeiron. Why are you using something big and complex like an FSA? Well, if we look at how an RPG combat works, it makes a lot of sense that makes a lot of sense to model it as an FSA. So what happens? Different creatures take their turns. The order matters, but the order itself, but what the order is doesn't matter, so long as the program knows what the order is. What I mean by that is that so long as the program knows what the order is, it doesn't matter if someone goes before someone else, so long as the computer knows this person goes now. It's very, very simple, very minimal, as I said before. This is somewhat simplified, and it doesn't account for things like environmental hazards or other creative things GMs throw at their players to challenge them. So, sorry? Yeah. So it is simplified, and the environmental things are generally not covered because of the keep it simple philosophy. And of course, turns are grouped into rounds. Rounds are grouped into a combat. Now, of course, this is more generalization. There are some systems that will bend this, but it is designed to be flexible enough to accommodate that. So what you do is you loop over the combatants in the combat every turn, every round, until there's no combatants from one side left. Generally, that's how you determine who wins an encounter of some kind. Generally. You could do something silly like, we're going to roll a 35 on our diplomacy and tell the Atu to be nice to us. That's, outside of what this handles. But generally, you're going to have one side up and breathing and the other side not. Generally. So every step of the way is determined, by what happened before and what happened now. Therefore, we need something to handle that. And an FSA, which I just explained above, is that, basically. And of course, this being Perl, we have a number of ways to do it. I might have missed a few here. PO NFA is not really what I want, and as I described above, my use case is very deterministic. Beyond that, I wasn't really wanting something event-based. I just wanted something very simple, very quick, and easy to get into. I didn't see a benefit in running an event loop for what is basically a program that has a user interface comprised of reading from std and printing to std with say. I didn't really see a benefit to an event loop. But I will get back to that. FSA rules is an FSA that's on CPAN. And frankly, I'm not sure how I missed it, because when I was looking at other choices, this seemed to really pop out at me. And if I had found it before, I would have used it. I'm guessing maybe a meta CPAN bug or a bug with me. FSA Engine is an FSA that's a moose roll that adds some FSA features to a class, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. That's what the Pathfinder rule set code is based on. You don't have to use this. You don't have to use FSA Engine, of course. The code for the Pathfinder rule set is self-contained. However, I feel that an FSA is a good choice for modeling this kind of thing. If someone, has some idea that they feel is much better, please do, hit me with it and we can go over it. So, on to FSA Engine. It's a moose roll, as I said. It adds some attributes and some methods to your class. Requires you to define some methods as well to, advance the state and all that kind of stuff. And, the attributes and methods control the automaton. The docs are good. You can go read those. I don't really see the point in reciting docs for a talk. So, it's really rather easy to get going. I was going with this maybe 20 minutes after looking at the docs. So it's quite easy to get going with. Now, what does this give us? Really, the app itself is pretty simple. You start it. It asks for some combatants and their initiatives. It asks you whether they're a PC or an NPC. Then it runs a combat until one side wins. Looking under the cover, each different game system is supported by a rule set class. The rule set class is really the brain of the app when it's running. It controls, how it determines who goes when, which is the app itself. But what if a player changes their mind? What if you forgot or incorrectly read a combat stat block and realized that there's supposed to be 4 more enemies in that encounter, and your wizard cast web? Well, he's going to say, I wanted to cast Fireball. I didn't know they were there. If I knew they were there, I would have cast Fireball. So then you need to go back, right? Now, I looked at various different ways of doing undo on CPAN. And they all did what they said on the 10. But they required me to write a lot of boring code, and I was, kind of curious of how I would manage all that state. And I was wondering, maybe there's an easier way to do this. Maybe I don't have to actually worry about keeping track of all this state to unwind and all that kind of thing. So I was, thinking, asking Magnet Pound Perl for advice, for suggestions on how to do this. And I had the idea that it turns out there is, a good way, there is a way to do this. And that the FSA runs some code refs that reference lexical variables to determine, what to do when. And so, therefore, if we have a bunch of lexicals and some code refs, Perl has a way to deal with those. And the idea is that you snapshot the state every once in a while. Maybe after every turn or every round or every something. Role system dependent, of course. And then if you want to roll back, you take a command from the GM, storyteller, or whatever, that specifies that they want to undo something. And that way you can roll the FSA back. The trick here is realizing that it's not really undo that we want. The trick here is realizing that we just want to put the FSA in a prior state. It's not undo per se, so much as it is changing reality out from under the FSA and saying, here, go do what you're doing, go advance to the next state. So if you redo reality under the covers for the FSA, I admit that it is a hack, but if you change reality out from under the FSA and you tell it to go to the next state, it'll be like it was in that previous state beforehand. And if you think about it, it's not really going back. It's just changing the state. So if you don't need to go back, then it's a lot simpler. And Perl has some tools that we can use to change the lexical state of a caller. This is, I will admit, it is, kind of hackish, and you're really not supposed to be doing this unless you have a really good reason. And I would greatly appreciate patches for this bit in particular to make it simpler, more robust, less evil. But it seems to work, and it seems to be relatively simple once you understand the black magic that is PadWalker. So once you get that, then it seems to be pretty straightforward to understand, how we want to do this. If this was just package variables, it would be a lot easier. Just, go through the stash and snapshot all the variables and then just write them back when you're done. But this is all modern Perl using Moose, etc., so it's lexicals. Thankfully, we have tools for that, like PadWalker. So what we do is, take a snapshot, push it onto a stack, and then when requested, unwind that stack and tell the FSA to go to the next state. So we're cheating the FSA into believing that it's somewhere that it wasn't. But it seems to work. As I said, it's cheating, it's a hack. Patches welcome, please. So, there's a lot left to do here. there are other RPG systems that I want to support. There are ways that I would like to investigate to serialize the state to disk. Say, for example, you're in the middle of some big, hefty, complex combat, and then something happened, you need to go home for whatever reason, or your server's blown up and you need to go and fix it, or whatever. It's midnight and you just realize that you have the end boss of the module at 99% hit points or whatever. So you want to basically leave things off, or come back where you left things off. And, what I tend to do for that is, besides, keeping track of whose turn it is, take a picture of the map and that kind of thing. And just hope you remember, whose turn it was, that kind of thing. But with this, if you serialize your state to disk, you could load it back in and say, oh, well, it's this person's turn, and it's this round, and it's this turn, and all these people have all these statuses that are on them, and so on and so forth. So the idea here is to make the computer remember so that you don't have to, because it might be a week or a couple weeks until you play that game again with that group. Right. So, any questions before we go to the demo? No? None. Sad panda. Sad panda. Okay. Right.
I was going to ask about holding and delaying.
Yeah. I'm not really sure particularly of how I'm going to be handling that. I guess we could do something like a printout of an array of who's holding their actions, who's delaying every turn, maybe, or that could be too voluminous, but some suggestions on how to do that are welcome, that kind of thing. Any ideas on how to do that better would be appreciated. There are also some other ideas that I have. I've been looking at the ticket widget kit, which is something that Paul Evans is putting together with some assistance from some others. That is another look at doing terminal I/O, terminal interfaces, which is separate from curses, which is not meant to provoke curses when you're developing with it. And I've been playing around with it a little bit, bent it, snapped it a few ways, but there have been patches put up, which is good. So I'm going to possibly investigate making this basic print and sit-in reading UI into something based on curses, such that there is an on-deck list, so to speak, on the right, and then scrolling UI in the center or something that says, okay, this person has gone, they did this, and then maybe another dialogue or another pane on the side that says, these people have these statuses, that kind of thing. Something like that. Something to utilize the big terminal that I have, even on the Air that I usually run with. It's 190 something by 60 or whatever. So I have a lot of space. I may as well use it for something just beyond printing simple text. So there's that. The code is on GitHub. That is a bit.ly shortcut to the GitHub URL. If you poke me, I can put down on IRC or whatever. The slides are up on SlideShare. Yes. So any other questions before the demo? Might run a little early on this. No, nothing. Okay. How about this? How about a question for you? Are there any game systems that would be most interesting to see in this, besides the obligatory Pathfinder that I put in because I play Pathfinder all the time?
My group's usually run Pathfinder or New World of Darkness.
Sorry?
New World of Darkness, Storyteller System.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's rather lighter than Pathfinder. But, yes?
Hero System Champions.
Sorry?
Hero System Champions.
How does that, if I recall correctly, that relates to D20?
No.
No?
It's not
I must be thinking of D20 Supers then. I'm sorry. How does that relate then to the systems I've mentioned?
It's still just a loop with actions. The quirk is that there's a speed chart, so not
Sorry?
the quirk is there's a speed chart, so not everyone gets an action every turn.
Okay. So that's more like the Shadowrun passes concept, where people can go more than once per turn, per round, rather. They get multiple turns per round. So, for example, if you're really, really, really fast in the meat world, you go twice, 3 times per round. Or if you're doing hacking, you go 2, 3 times in the Matrix. That kind of thing. Okay. That, well, once you solve the problem with n plus 1, n plus 11 is really just an elaboration of that, right? So it would be interesting to figure out how to do that kind of thing. Maybe something like an attribute on the combatant class that specifies passes, and then you would just decrement that every round or something. Just, designing off the top of my head here.
That works for Shadowrun. For Hero, the problem is that if you're like speed 3, you're going to phase 4, 8, and 12.
Huh? What?
Actions in Hero system, they're spread out evenly.
Okay.
At a speed of 2, you go once every 6 phases, and you have a speed of 4, you go once every 3 phases. So
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Another brand is a game I played is Metal Magic More, and in that you roll the initiative.
Mhm.
If your initiative's high enough, then you go there, and then you subtract. On average, it's 25. If you're really good with your weapons, it can be less than that. If it's still above 0, then you go again. If that's,
Less than that, you said?
it's like if you roll and you get, say, a 33.
Mhm.
You go on 33. If you're decent with your weapon, then you would go again on 8.
Okay, I guess how that works is the speed is the delay between your turns?
Sort of. There's
Interesting.
a
Okay.
base in your skill base number. The base delay is 25. So if you roll 26 or higher, then you will get 2 actions within 1 round.
Right. Interesting. Okay.
Conclusion, there are a lot of game systems and they all do weird and different things.
Yes, I've gone over index.rpg.net, and I know there's all kinds of crazy, silly stuff out there, and I just wanted to get some of the crazier ideas so that I could think of, how are we going to make this work? Yes?
I wondered in late, so I don't know if you talked about this, but the exalted turn system.
No, I haven't. I'm vaguely familiar. Elaborate.
Basically, I'm not actually. I've only played Exalted a few times. I have friends that played a lot more. But Exalted is actually very keeping track of combat turns because when you go next is determined by what you do. Like you'll have a
Oh, jeez.
yeah, it's like 8, and
That's going to be hard for this.
your action only takes
Mhm.
1 turn. You go again on the next turn, but if your action
Mhm.
takes 3 turns,
Well,
they actually come with a little counter, and so you can move
Well, you can-
markers around
yeah.
to keep track of this because it's that confusing.
there's a simpler version of that in Pathfinder that I need to think about, in that certain spells are a full round action to cast, which means you can't do anything else, except maybe 5-foot step, if I recall. But the idea is, I guess you're saying that you need to have an action waiting, right? Such that... Trixie. Okay.
There's other fantasy stuff with the systems where that kind of works too, because they have different weapon speeds. And
Like old D&D, for example, if I recall correctly. Right, Rick? Different weapons have different speeds?
That's, in first edition advanced D&D only.
Aha. Little encyclopedic there. Yeah. Much respect to you there, sir. I have to say, you really know your stuff. So, right. Yes, I love tmux. Code Perl game. Right. Let's do a quick look at the code as we go through here. So here is the base combat runner, which is, of course, very simple. So, and here is the guts of what I was talking about today. Basically, you have the FSA, you have some transitions. This is all, in the docs. There's there is a given when loop, which is on simple strings, Rick. So it should be deterministic. It is only on simple strings. And there is a default case saying WTF. So I think this should be reasonable and not break, so long as it's on simple strings, right? Probably. Probably. Okay, so I was trepidatious about using given when, but I justified it by telling myself it's just simple strings, and there's a default case. I should be okay. I hope. I hope. We'll see. Yes, we will. There are, there's very basic tracking for status, as you can see here. Revive and inflict. And inflict takes an optional number of rounds, which means that, say you're, in Pathfinder, you could be knocked unconscious for a period of time. Someone casts a sleep spell, you're asleep for X rounds. Or in 4th edition, you are maybe days, save ends, that kind of thing. Which this doesn't handle because it doesn't do that, but the idea is that there is a status attribute on the combatants, which you can modify. So this doesn't really handle save ends, but if a system needed to do that, you could do that. And something you may want to explore is, for something that uses 4th edition, you could say, at the end of a player's turn, print out something that says, did you roll your save? And, players sometimes forget that, especially in big combats or when they're kind of tired. Sorry? Yes, there's that. So you want to be sure that people remember to do everything they should. Maybe something for Pathfinder would be, for an NPC, this NPC has an ability that recharges. Make sure you remember to roll the recharge. Or else you don't get to inflict things on your players as much as you should. Because it's very nice when you have a dragon or something. Or a mummy, or a beholder, or... Yes. Sorry? Mm-hmm. Sleep is for number of rounds.
Natural sleep. You wake up if someone touches you.
Sure. But there is the... Sure, but there is the revive command here, which is supported for means of saying, I removed this condition from this person. Say someone dies in a combat and you resurrect them in the middle of the combat, which is kind of silly, but you could. Or say you put them to sleep and they wake you up or whatever. And this is there for means of, getting past that kind of thing, because I wanted to be able to add and remove conditions, just to be sure that I don't forget them, just to be sure that my players don't forget them. And that code was written before I gave this talk at OPW. So, conference-driven development is awesome. And I'm kind of surprised no one is making an annoyance on IRC. You are to be commended. Right, so this is generally the structure inside. The idea is that, it's really basic Moose code. It uses some stuff. It has the undo manager, which we'll look at. Is it in? Yeah. So we have the undo manager, which is basically a simple object wrapper around PadWalker. If there's a better approach to this, particularly, I would be very interested in knowing. And, yes. So, test. Hey, Rick?
Yes.
What's that goblin's name that you're infamous for?
Huck.
Spell it for me?
H-U-K.
H-U-K, all right. Does he have an initiative bonus?
Oh, God, no.
0. So he's a D&D basic goblin, I guess? Okay. Yeah, in Pathfinder, they have a bracewell plus 4 dex. So they go fast. They go fast. He's not a PC. Apeiron. Let's put him at 0. Yes, he's a PC. Done. Make it bigger. Can everyone see that now? I'm sorry. Yes? No? Maybe? Good. Okay. But let's see, he got a 10. I got a 0. I suck. Yes. So, say Huck is doing something, whatever Huck would be using, maybe a small flail or something, or whatever, I guess. A stick. Wow. Okay. Tomorrow night when I'm running We Be Goblins, you can be a goblin with a flail, or a Morningstar, or a dagger, or a sword.
I wouldn't know what to do with that sword.
You hit it with the pointy end.
Or the other end, it would work. So anyway, let's say inflict apeiron, dazed, 5. Done. Oops. Yeah. I need to fix that, but anyway, yes. So the idea is that, it basically goes around and, tracks, what things are done, that kind of thing. Yes, so there's that. And I think that is generally it. If there are no further questions, I need to fix that before tomorrow night to actually use it. So if there are any other questions, suggestions, that kind of thing, do let me know. Anything, any tomatoes to throw or anything like that I need to roll acrobatics to dodge or reflex to dodge? Anyone? No?
Eventually, I want all of my players to have iPads, and I eventually want to have some network systems so that they don't have their character sheets. And
There are some firms that are working on that.
yeah.
As a matter of fact, yeah. I'm pretty sure that Wizards is doing something like that.
I wasn't going to say it.
Moving on.
Play for you and you just want them to know their character sheets online, then there's the i4U website.
I'm mostly using mythweavers.com for mine, which seems to work well. It's not updated live, but it does seem to work.
I know there's a new one. I cannot remember the name of it right now. It's, I mostly know about it because they had a big Kickstarter, and if you were donating to the Kickstarter,
Sure, of course.
you got beta access as
Mhm.
a DM. My boyfriend donated to the Kickstarter and was using me to try and test it out. He discovered that it's got integrated voice and video chat.
Oh, really?
With like a map. And,
Is this on a tablet or?
it's web-based,
Okay, fair enough.
so you could actually.
There's several web-based.
Yeah, I went for console, of course.
But it's got a few different dice set rules, so you can do like Shadowrun style dice set, you can do Earth Dawn style dice set.
Isn't that the same thing?
No, not close.
Oh, see, I thought they were the same system.
No, they're just in the universe, but they're very different systems.
Touche.
Earth Dawn uses,
Okay, just the same setting then.
yeah, Earth Dawn uses a full set of polyhedrals. If you roll the highest number on the polyhedral, you can roll and add the result.
Exploding dice then.
Explode.
Yeah.
Shadowrun is just D6s.
Okay, interesting.
All the D6s.
Yes. Yes, I put my 16 D6s on the table and I say, spot the Shadowrun player. Yeah.
I play Deckers in Shadowrun, so it's like, let's roll.
Low karma.
This attack roll in VR with all these bonuses.
Yep.
Shake, shake, shake.
Yep.
So it
Yes.
looks like it was pretty good so far, even if we working, which seemed to be a problem on my end because I don't know Linux.
This will work for you. Yes.
For a full virtual table, the best thing I've seen is Pro Fantasy. However, that's
Vaguely familiar.
It has to be installed on everybody's computer, and it's not open source. Then you have to pay.
Ew.
GM has to buy the expensive one, and then the players have to buy it cheap.
Right. So I will be fixing this and using it for tomorrow night at game night. And I'll be doing a We Be Goblins for Pathfinder at game night tomorrow night. And I so far only have 3 players. I could probably... Sorry?
I thought it was 4 players.
No one's told me. No one's told me that they've signed up. I can accommodate easily up to 6, generally. So if a couple other people would like to sign up, that would be cool. I would like to do some other things this week that would also be Pathfinder. So if anyone is interested in doing that kind of thing, or if someone else wants to do something, Rick, I would love to, play along with Huck the Goblin if you have an extra slot, that kind of thing. So yes, poke me on IRC. I am apeiron, the big loud guy with opinions. Yes, so there's that. Code is on GitHub, slides are on SlideShare. I was going to put them on Speaker Deck, but annoying for reasons. So yes, that's about it. Thank you very much. If there are no further questions. No? Okay, thank you very much. Looking to see everyone at game night.